have a very intensive 2 days, and now I think everyone is getting very hot. Yeah.
Well, your last speaker was wonderful. I really enjoyed listening to her.
Yeah, and of course, Samantha did a great job. She speak all this the post-pandemic, which is exactly the current situation. Many companies suffering.
Yes. I think that her point was really good, and it really got to a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about, or speak about is trust, is the distance between people as a result of the workaround to address the pandemic created relationships that were not close like they used to be.
Yes.
You know, individuals were not as connected. So that lack of connectedness translated into a lack of trust. And
yes, great. So Dr. Cliff, maybe before you start, let me do a very short introduction for you to the audience.
Great.
Okay. So Dr. Cliff is now the Vice President of Wells Fargo in the United States. He's currently on the road. He's also the adjunct instructor at Herzing University. He has been serving the financial operations as a profession for over 22 years. He has been the chair of Employee Resources Group, where he implemented mentoring and skills building program designed to transfer the knowledge and the skills necessary for organizations. He has a lot of experience in doing this knowledge transfers, the tacit knowledge capture and so on. And he has a lot of very deep insight on the tricks, on the roadblocks, how to remove the roadblocks of the knowledge transfer within all this experience, between the experienced people to the young people. So let's hear what Dr. Cliff will share with us. His topic, the factors of trust in tacit knowledge transfers. Thank you, Cliff. Now it's over to you. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Is my presentation, are the slides there? Do you have the slides?
Yeah.
Do I need to use them?
Okay. I see. Can you just help the Dr. Cliff for the slide? I see. Can you do that? Yeah. Okay, good.
Wonderful. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Wonderful.
Okay. I have them here. All right. So thank you for the wonderful introduction, Fisher. I really appreciate that. To Fisher's point, I have over 20 years experience in financial services industry. And during a lot of that time, I was an invited speaker at events throughout the United States. During that time, the general topic of those conversations were around the war for talent in the financial services industry. Nowadays, when we think about this same topic, we talk about how can I transfer knowledge? How can I transfer the knowledge of my talented group of employees to my new employees, or what we would say my up and coming employees. Essentially, however, that even though the name of these presentations has changed, the problem is not. The problem is how do I empower my workforce, or how do I help my workforce continue to capture, retain, and then transfer the knowledge, both tacit and explicit, mainly tacit, as it relates to this conversation, to maintain my competitive advantage and to increase innovation. So today we'll talk about these 5 topics, just kind of give you a basic overview. Sounds like the previous speaker kind of took care of a lot of that, so we'll get through that quickly, because my goal is really to see to make this a conversation where there'll be hopefully some questions and some give and take in that respect. The types of trust, just a basic overview on that. Tacit knowledge and trust relationships, where we'll talk about the types of trust and why trust is important in tacit knowledge transfer, the dynamics of trust in the workplace, and then just a few things that you as practitioners should think about and consider when administering your programs or even relationships. And then lastly, just a thought exercise for each of the participants around tacit knowledge transfer. I think I called it homework in the initial presentation that I provided to Fisher, but there's no such thing as homework for us. In this case, it's just really just a reflection exercise. So with that, let's begin. So there are two types of trust, or two types of knowledge that can be transferred. Obviously, there's explicit, which is the most commonly used trust types of knowledge in a relationship. And then there's tacit, which is usually the more valuable of the two, but the most difficult to obtain. So types of knowledge and the importance of tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge, as I said before, is the most common of the two. It is knowledge that is defined, it's canonized, it's investigated, and then it is recorded to some sort of media. It could be a process or procedure that's written down, databases, or rules and regulations. The functional definition of explicit knowledge is knowledge that is often captured in reference documents, guides, best practices. And because explicit knowledge exists in a formal codified form, it is readily available for general distribution and consumption. Essentially, somebody took the time to look at it, write it down, and it is available for anybody who can access that data. Tacit knowledge, conversely, is not written down. It is very rarely defined, but it is the stock of expertise and knowledge within an organization. Generally, that would mean it is the stock of knowledge and expertise located within the individuals in the organizations, right? And it is not easily transferred. In fact, tacit knowledge is, as the previous speaker had mentioned, trust becomes a factor. So that's kind of part of the problem we see with the post-pandemic world, where we are all looking at each other through the other side of a computer screen, as opposed to actually standing next to each other and talking to each other and really getting that, building those connections. This suggests that the single and most helpful tool in the transfer of tacit knowledge is the opportunity to interact with coworkers. That's Booker's way, the study that Booker, who I'm quoting here, that's his way of saying what I just said, is without that personal interaction, it's hard to form those bonds, and those bonds are the cornerstone of how tacit knowledge is transferred. So to summarize this part, if we use the metaphor of the iceberg, we would look at explicit knowledge as being the knowledge that is seeing, right? It's knowable, it's definable. You can see the top of the iceberg. You can understand its dimensions and the like. Whereas tacit knowledge would be the amount of the iceberg that is submerged under the water. Generally speaking, this knowledge, like that of the iceberg, is the greatest amount of the mass. It is the largest part of the knowledge that we look at understanding and capturing. Similarly to the iceberg, that is where its greatest amount of mass lies. So why is tacit knowledge transfer? Why is it important? And the reason for that is I would hope clear to all of us here, but it is a critical component of the transfer of tacit knowledge would be, or is predicated on two particular attributes, and that is an individual's willingness to share and another individual or the recipient's willingness to use the knowledge provided. Generally, what this does is it provides extremely contextual understanding of specific things within an industry or an organization that are critical for that organization to maintain or keep its competitive advantage. And that may be as simple as understanding the direction of the organization within the context of how the organization does business. It may be as large as understanding the direction of an industry based on previous experience within that industry, an understanding of the nuanced nature of regulations as they apply to that industry. And somewhere in between would be the expert knowledge of a subject matter expert as to how a particular process is done at their particular organization in the context of understanding both the spirit of the organization and how it conducts its operations, and the overarching regulatory environment in which the rules and regulations as to how this particular process can occur. So as I had said before at the end of the last slide, there are two attributes that are predicates of tacit knowledge transfer. Those would be a willingness to share and a willingness to use. In order for those two things to exist in a relationship, there must be a certain amount of trust. And that's where we are. This is what we're talking about here. As you've heard probably throughout this weekend, and I will be willing to share with you now, there is a social nature within organizational environments. These social constructs or rules govern both formal and informal interactions. And when done correctly, and they facilitate the sharing and use of tacit knowledge through participation in interactions which hopefully allows for the development of relationships that are created through participation in these events. Success is something that is always repeated. So when you have organizations that are thoughtful about their social structure, they are set up in such a way where it celebrates successes, which increases the likelihood that those sort of behaviors will be repeated. The success of tacit knowledge exchange on an individual level is also based on this same principle. And success is repeated through positive outcomes on both sides. So the person sharing the knowledge has to feel positive about sharing the knowledge. The person receiving the knowledge has to feel positive in the outcome of that sharing, whether that was leveraged to make a decision that helped them to better understand the environment, or if it helped them to address a particular problem. Basically, if you want to think of it, success will be repeated is really the catchphrase there. Any relationship struggles within this relationship, or even within the larger social construct or within the individual relationships, will result in a reduced level of trust and exchange. Tacit knowledge transfer clearly improves organizational performance because it gives individuals insight that they did not previously have into how the organization functions or how the industry functions, which gives them greater understanding of their role within that structure. This is an outcome that came from an exercise by Fuller. I will be citing this particular study a couple more times throughout this presentation. So the types of trust. There are three general types of trust trust in corporate tacit relationships. Some of them, there are different types for each of them. The ones that I'm citing for this particular presentation are based on the professional relationship trust model, and that is calculus-based trust, knowledge-based trust, and identification-based trust. And the reason I use these two is because it speaks to the nature of the trusting relationship, which is is phased. Individuals begin at calculus-based trust, which would be the first part of the trust relationship. It's the initial phase, and it's where trust is based on an understanding of the norms within the environment in which the relationships are being formed, and an understanding of what those expectations are, both for the person being, for both parties in that relationship. And then additionally, you could also look at this as it translates into the previous statement I made about success being repeated, is willingness to share particular information and willingness to use particular information will be based on the success of that of the application of that information. So it's kind of a calculated step. That moves into knowledge-based trust, which would be the second rung, which is a deeper understanding of, the understanding of the individual who is the SME and their value, the value of trust that they have, the wealth of knowledge they have, and how that can be used. That understanding by both parties is the second rung on, if we were to call it a ladder. The third is the identification-based trust. In this phase, this is where both parties have a much more reciprocal relationship. Not only is the person who is the SME providing, dispensing knowledge to the person who is not, but also the person who is not is giving vital information that is contextual, that is informing the SME and their understanding of the particular type of knowledge. In other words, this is where when both parties are acting as agents for one another, there is an opportunity for knowledge creation, and that is the innovative part of the identification-based trust piece. So the professional relationship trust model provides contextual information on links between trust, knowledge exchange, and organizational performance. I think as we kind of talked about the relationship, how trust is formed, you'll see that the survey referenced here talks about trust, self-efficacy, but the important part are the reciprocal relationship. That's where, and that is where that exchange is where you will start to innovate and build develop new types of knowledge, but also relationship expectancy. So everybody understands what their role is within the social construct within the organization and how they approach the relationship. Not only the relationship, but it is also how the boundaries of the trust relationship start to develop. So dynamics of trust in the workplace. I think we've talked a little bit about this. We've touched on this a bit in the previous portion of this conversation. But when we look at the dynamics of trust and talk about personal relationships and tacit knowledge in the context of those relationships, tacit knowledge is generally considered not only a valuable asset, mainly shared in the context of personal relationships. Some might argue that it's only shared in the context of personal relationships, or at least in some sort of bond between individuals. And the reputation for execution, that these types of relationships are formed through direct personal interactions. These interactions can take place remotely. It is more difficult, as I was speaking in my opening with Fisher, for trust to be gained between individuals who are looking through a medium, so to speak, to connect with one another. It's a little bit more difficult to have that sort of personal interaction that develops that bond. It's not impossible, it's just more difficult. More traditionally, I think we've all grown up in a world where to develop those sort of relationships, you have to have had personal interaction with the individual with whom you're developing those relationships with. Participants in these sort of personal interactions gives you the opportunity to gain the admiration or to gain that connection, which is really what this bullet is talking to when we talk about admiration for abilities that each other has and sets the environment for the knowledge exchange. That is usually done through a personal interaction. The above both lead to the fundamental elements of exchange, which they, direct interaction with people and understanding the personal nature of relationships empowers people to have that willingness to share tacit knowledge, and then the people receiving the knowledge based on those personal interactions generally empowers them to feel comfortable with or willing to use that knowledge, which is what we really are looking for when we have programs or develop programs where we consider tacit knowledge as a critical element of them, is getting people to actually use that knowledge. That's where we as business leaders, that's where we gain is through that activity. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the two predicate concepts, willingness to share and willingness to use. The concept of willingness to share tacit knowledge is based on the perceived trustworthiness of both parties. This also did come out of the Fuller study that I referenced earlier. And what it does is it encourages reciprocation between parties within the relationship, which allows for, remember when I had said that the three types of knowledge, they were like rungs on a ladder. Moving between those rungs on the ladder is what's called tactical climbing. And you move through there, and it really, what you're talking about is the movement of your relationship as it moves from one of an introductory phase through to a trust development phase, and on through to a long-lasting relationship. What we would say, as we look at that reciprocation, we start to see this tactical climbing as individuals move from one level of trust to the next. What this results in is improved operational performance if done correctly, because the subject matter expert or the knowledge party in the relationship is dispensing knowledge to the non-SME or the person or the knowledge seeker in such a way, and hopefully providing them the right context that is readily applicable to their daily routine. And that's where business leaders start to see truly improved operational performance, because they're learning the efficiencies of the knowledge master, so to speak, and they're able to either A, replicate them, or B, replicate them and improve on them or innovate on them. And that is what provides you with that improved operational performance. And then willingness to use. The willingness to use concept is based on an individual's ability to understand the perceived usefulness of the information shared, right? And that's where the other attribute of the personal relationship is it becomes much easier to understand and see the usefulness of the knowledge that's being shared with them, how it can be applied, where it should be applied, and under what circumstances it should be applied. That certainly encourages cohesiveness in the relationship between the subject matter expert or knowledge employee and the person that is the knowledge seeker. But on the whole, it generally provides group cohesiveness within the organization altogether if that knowledge is being dispensed and people are showing a willingness to use it, and they are being congratulated for using it, or they're back to the success as a replication concept that I talked about earlier, where if it's looked at and treated as a success when people use the tacit knowledge, it will continue to be replicated. It will continue to become much more trusted by the knowledge seekers, and therefore it will be used throughout the organization without concern, or with lesser concern, I should say. But the other part of that is the innovation piece. As a person brings in that knowledge, they internalize it, and then they innovate it based on their experience, and it changes the knowledge a little bit, but also has the opportunity to improve the situation. So that would be the innovative force there. So ways in which we as practitioners can encourage trust and tacit knowledge transfer within our organizations are, whether if we're looking at it in terms of administrating a group of mentors or mentees, or in other words, being the mentor's mentor, or we would encourage those individuals or the job coaches, if that's the avenue that's being used, to partner with and spend time with these individuals in a one-to-one, or as a small a number to one as possible environment, which would allow people, the individual participants, to have a very clear understanding of how the job coach or how the mentor or the expert addresses particular situations, what elements they need to look at and understand in their decision-making process. And it also, the obvious other attribute that it provides is the greater opportunity for them to bond. Just more time together, more time learning from each other, learning how each other or that interaction deepens the bond. The encouragement of sharing insights, that's what we're talking about there, job shortcuts and the like. But even more than that, we have to have mentors that are willing to share insights where they were successful. Clearly, those are the ones we like the most. But also, it's important that those mentors share experiences where they were not successful. What happened wrong? How to recognize that? Because a part of clearly tacit knowledge is something that's been gained over a career, and everyone who's had a career has had successes where they've learned from those, but they've also had failures where they've learned from those. And it's important that we pass on not only the successes, but the failures, because I think we can all agree that failure can be an incredible learning tool. And that learning tool, it's better if we can pass on the knowledge we gain from those failures than have the individuals relive those failures. So the ways in which practitioners can encourage an environment conducive to tacit knowledge transfer. This is a continuation, and really it's helping people to understand, or encouraging the sharing of organizational philosophy, industry trends, things that would lead one to get good contextual understanding of the industry and the organization which they work in. Even as much as understanding organizational rumors. If those are, in some organizations, that is a way of signaling change. But this sort of thing, the understanding these sort of elements and in the context of the organization and the organization's culture are going to be critical parts of encouraging an environment or an atmosphere where tacit knowledge can and should be transferred. So lastly, I think we're coming up here on time, or getting fairly close. Elements for practitioners to consider. So and a lot of this is based out of the study I did for my doctoral dissertation, where I looked at what things practitioners could do in financial services industry. A couple of the things that came up were around organizational fairness were transparency. So what was meant by transparency was individuals who were asked to participate in programs or were selected, that selection process was open to everybody and everybody understood how that was going to occur, and that it took place in accordance with those expectations. In other words, my friend wouldn't have preference over some other person. Everybody was looked upon based upon their merit as a potential participant, and no other real factors. Transparency in how items would be addressed for program participants if issues were to come up, and we are all human beings, which are complex thinking individuals, so problems can occur. How will those problems be addressed? How will those outcomes be made known in a way that is both respectful of individuals' privacy rights, but also supportive of the overall program aims, desires, and needs, and how it will function. What that did show me is in programs where this took place, there was a stronger employee commitment. The organization's programs, be it mentor programs, job sharing, or virtual teams, they all had stronger reputations. There was a very much a source of pride in participating in each of these, and they were very successful. Where in organizations that I studied that where there wasn't perceived fairness, individuals didn't really want to share the knowledge they had learned. People felt as though they had to be a mentor, or they had to participate in the program. And there were negative feelings about the organization in general. The organization doesn't treat me fairly. They're not really interested in my career, my future. They're not willing to empower me. So trust is a multidimensional thing in these programs. It is something that you have to create within in the context of creating the programs, and then also obviously within the relationships as well. So another way of looking at trust in the individual relationships is ensuring that as you are matching individuals, you're matching individuals of like personalities, you're doing everything you can to help them create that bond much more successfully. So there are organizations that have full-blown sort of questionnaires that they use to try to understand the personalities of the participants to match. A couple of the organizations that I surveyed for my doctoral research did that. Others were using Myers-Briggs tests. And then there were some that just placed individuals. The successful programs had some sort of way of pairing individuals in such so that like-minded people were paired. It made it a lot easier to there were fewer barriers in those relationships. There were a much easier time or quicker time to build that rapport in that relationship. And then the last part of participant matching, or and this applies to the programs on the whole, is the ability to identify and quickly address any sort of barriers in those relationships. Like I said, we're all complex individuals, so problems and barriers will exist, can exist, but the quicker we can identify them as practitioners and address them in a way that is effective, the more successful those relationships will be for the individuals involved and also for the organization as a whole. And then, so that I think kind of helps you understand what creating trust through transparency is. Obviously, making sure that you do create trust in a meaningful way. And the last part I would say in this is obviously we had talked about it even anecdotally, but formally combining multiple modalities will increase effectiveness. This was also something that came out of the Baker study, which showed that the more modalities you had, the more time, or the greater the ability to leverage various learning styles. Also, the more effective the programs would be because there are multiple sort of modalities, and you could calibrate a method of transfer that was best suited for a desired outcome. And so I think I'm at time. I may be even slightly over. Please forgive me, Fisher. So I will wrap it up by providing you with this. This is what I said was a homework assignment. Just reflect on what we've discussed here today and consider how it would be implemented within your organization, within the program, within your organization, if you have one. If you don't have one, I'm sure we certainly can help you with that. But also, if you don't have one, think about how it might be implemented within your personal lives, your relationships, and the like. And with that in mind, I'll leave it open to questions if there are any. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to you, Fisher.
Thank you, Dr. Cliff. Thank you for that. Okay. So actually, Dr. Cliff shares with this the trust in knowledge transfers. And I think for Dr. Cliff, not only he did this, but also he also have a very good experience in doing this knowledge transfers, and he find all these different tricks in the knowledge transfer. And that's why he has this homework for us, for everyone, all audience, if possible. You can just submit. Afterwards, you can just go to our website, GO-TKM. We will create this questionnaire in our website, GO-TKM.com or .org. Sorry for that. And then you can just submit your question or your answers. Also, at the same time, I think Dr. Cliff gave us a good sharing, and just a good news to everyone. He will be back in mid of February next year to give us 2 additional workshops. Each workshop lasts for 3 hours. That's mainly address how tacit knowledge transfers. What are the key elements of transferring this tacit knowledge inside the organizations? So if anyone interested in his session, please contact our customer service. You can also go our website called mentoringo.com, mentoringo.com website, or go our WeChat official account, mentoringo 导师学院. Thank you. Okay. Now thank you, Dr. Cliff, for wonderful sharing. And then, so now I would like to go to our next key speaker.